Welcome back to another video. I have another book recommendation for you. So one of the questions I get often is, what book do I recommend for people who are interested in Shingon? And recognizing that there are not a lot of texts in English that discuss Shingon Buddhism, I thought I'd recommend this one. It's the Buddhist Tradition by Professor Theodore DeBerry. This is actually a text that I came upon when I was in college and completely stumbled on it, and there's an entire chapter on Shingon. One of the things I like about this book is that it was published in 1969, and besides the fact that Professor DeBerry was, he just recently passed away, unfortunately, was a tremendous scholar of Chinese and Japanese texts, is he discusses a range of different Buddhist schools and Buddhist history. The book is not terribly long. Since it's very old, it's easy to find for inexpensive. Actually, this is the text that we use here at the temple for Buddhist studies classes. So we have a few books here. This is the one that we use for some classes. So it does give an overview of different Buddhist schools, Buddhist history, the transmission of Buddhism to various Asian countries. And one of the things I in particular like about this text is it predates a lot of the popular texts on Buddhism. So Professor DeBerry does a very good job of discussing primary works, primary sutras, historical events and actors, rather than maybe a modern person's experience with Buddhism or their own personal meditative journey. And those books are good, but I think especially in the beginning, it's really important that people who are interested in Buddhism get an idea of Buddhist history and Buddhist philosophy. And this book does a pretty good job of giving the reader an overview of some of the different schools of Buddhism, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this short video, a little bit about Shingon. So there is a whole chapter on Shingon. This is one that I found when I was in college, and I remember reading it, that whole section, kind of nonstop, right in the book stack. So when I was in college, one of my jobs was working in the library and reshelving books, and that's how I stumbled upon this. So I read that whole section and was really quite interested in Shingon. And sometimes people ask me, why did I get interested in Shingon Buddhism rather than a different school of Buddhism? And in part, it had a lot to do with the chapter in this text on Shingon, because it discusses a lot of Kukai's, the work that he did for people. So it describes in here Kukai establishing the very first public school in Japan. And I was very inspired by that story, thinking that, so long ago, someone recognized the benefit of education for the masses, recognized that only with that basic education could they go on and study Buddhism. But also, one of the things that was really interesting in terms of Kukai's work was that he worked to make the school free. So he himself had gone to what we would probably today refer to as college, but at that time you would work with a private tutor. So his family had the means to send him to that tutor, and I think him recognizing the value of that education wanted to share it with others. So that was very inspirational to me at the time. I was very interested in how Buddhism helped people in a very practical way, and I thought that was a very good example of that practicality. So the Buddhist Tradition, Professor Theodore DeBerry, it's a very good text. It is older, as you can, I don't know if it shows up on the video, but our copy here is, the pages are yellowed, and it shows its age, but still a very good work. It does give an overview of a lot of different Buddhist schools, so it's a really good introduction to Buddhism, the different schools of Buddhism, if you're not aware. Chinese Buddhism, Buddhism's transmission to Japan. So here we have from page 287, there's a whole section on Kukai and esoteric Buddhism. There's also a section on Tendai. So you get the two early schools of Buddhism that became very influential in Japanese culture and amongst the Japanese people. So it can be found online very inexpensively. We have about 10 copies here at the temple. So as I often refer and tell people when they come here, this is a great experiment to see what people are interested in, what type of Buddhist studies that they're interested in, and what type of text they want to study. So this is one that I've selected. Hopefully other people find it interesting, but I do recommend that if you are looking for a text on Shingon, that this be part of that study. You'll get a lot out of it in a short amount of reading. And one of the really good things here is that Professor DeBerry discusses Kukai's work on the 10 stages of mind and gives us a short overview of that. So I'll have some other book and reading recommendations for you in the future. But if you are interested in Buddhism, if you're interested in Shingon in particular, this is a good place to start. It gives a very good introduction and overview of different Buddhist schools, and you really can't go wrong, especially in English, from someone who was such a powerhouse translator and scholar, especially translating things out of classical Chinese. So 1969, still a classic.